Hello, everybody. It's Francina Simone, the founder of the Midnight Scholar Society, where I teach deep psychology, critical thinking, media literacy through the lens of astrology, divination, and tarot. But also, a lot of you know that I'm an author, and so I do publishing consultations on the side. And I had a client, and we talked about some really cool things. And I want to bring up two things. If you are someone you know is, well, not only a creative entrepreneur, you're going to find a lot of gems here, but also if you run a micro publisher or a boutique publisher or you're self-publishing, I have a book recommendation for you that is going to blow your mind probably and release a lot of pain, stress, ache over the work aspect of it and how to work going towards a future, things like that. And I also want to bring up not only just show you the book, but talk about two concepts from it, or at least two things in which this book looks at that I think solves a lot of problems that big publishing had or traditional publishing had. So, number one, let's talk about the book. Okay, Mixing Work with Pleasure by Toshio Suzuki. So this is My Life at Studio Ghibli. I absolutely loved reading this book. I actually read this in preparation for starting the Midnight Scholar Society, which is an occult society. It's not a publisher. You get what I'm saying? It is kind of like a library of sorts where I collect a lot of resources and information and share, and I teach classes. And we have a Discord community if you're interested, links down below. But it's all about self-mastery and alchemy. So I run like essentially a society for alchemists. That is not publishing. Yes, we publish some things, but just in-house, you know what I mean? It's not, it's not a publishing, like company. So why, I'm talking about like Studio Ghibli is an animation studio, right? But this helps me build a society, and why it can also help you with your publishing company. Because one, the book is just great. But the book is by Toshio Suzuki, and he was a producer over at Studio Ghibli, and I think he went on to, achieve other titles. But the point that I'm making is that he was very much on the ground floor of Ghibli, just inside from its birth, essentially, all the way up until its recent years. And in that, you learn that being a creative and owning a company, or being a creative and being part of a company, right, is a huge task. It's huge. You have a goal, you have something you want to make. How do you get there? And as a creative person, it can seem impossible in like corporate America, which is where traditional publishing fit. Because in corporate America, creativity is considered something that is an afterthought, when in all actuality, what you'll learn from reading Mixing Work with Pleasure, My Life at Studio Ghibli, what you're going to learn is that creativity is the point of business. In business, creativity is just you've got problems, and how do you solve them, right? You come up with new ideas. That's creativity. It requires inspiration. So then when you think of business, what does the business do? Well, it has a problem, or solution to a problem. So of course, business and creativity go hand in hand. So when you leave it as an afterthought, you have a lot of failed businesses, business ideas that go flat. You have stagnation. You may start and put a lot of life into it at first, but then it starts to slowly die and wither away, because the nurturing, which requires creativity or alchemy in a lot of different contexts, isn't happening. And so Mixing Work with Pleasure, My Life at Studio Ghibli, talks an awful lot about what it's like to run a boutique company, essentially a small company that has a big impact, big name and brand recognition. You can't really go anywhere without somebody knowing something about Ghibli to some degree, especially people who are interested in film, animation. As soon as you move into international space, if you're just interested in film but not animation, if you were you can come in contact with it very easily, and it's a very small studio. So I really recommend you read that. Honestly, I could do book reviews on it if anybody has read it and wants me to talk more in depth about some concepts there. But you're going to learn everything that there is to learn. Honestly, there's marketing advice in there. There's growth advice. There's advice on how to navigate interpersonal relationships. So the emotional dynamics, and navigating really tense and stressful moments, and how to stay human, how to see the humanity in someone else that you're working with, and how to kind of separate. Again, work with pleasure. Mixing it requires it being separate and then coming together. And sometimes it's together and you have to pull it apart to bring it back together again. And there are some moments that Suzuki covers when it comes to that. And I thought it was great. The book is great. Please do go out and read it. Now, that being said, some of the two things I want to focus on that the book kind of brings up is, one, staying small while having big impact. Okay. Always stay small is something that it talks about. And the second thing I want to talk about is how do you stay small when it comes to working with multiple people, right? Publishing, any type of creative entrepreneurship, any type of company where you're producing something, sometimes it requires you to have other people on board, right? When we work for ourselves, or we create content, and the only thing that we're doing and producing is and selling is our own product. So for instance, if I write a book and I self-publish, that's that can be an all hands on deck, or I can hire out people to work on certain things. But as a self-publisher, I'm probably not going to have an in-house editor. And if I do, I might have an in-house developmental editor, but not an in-house copy editor. And in-house generally means somebody that's on salary, right? Usually you might work with someone, but on a contractual basis. And so the concept is, how do you navigate that when it's not just the self, right? It's easy to navigate that as a single person. But what happens when you are a publisher as an entity, and you have people coming to publish your books, but you're not going to be editing anything, you're not going to be designing anything, you're not going to be marketing anything, you're not going to be drawing up contracts for anything. These are going to go to other people. These are all full-time jobs. You're going to be the project manager of a thing. That's everybody's. I want to say that's what links like an animation studio and a cult society and a publisher all together, is essentially you become a project manager, and that comes with the responsibility of and I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the second part, comes in with the responsibility of managing people and managing teams and figuring out how do you keep your company small and yet do this and survive past your initial project and into the next one. Oh man, I don't know if you all knew this, but Studio Ghibli does not, they do one film a year, essentially. They focus on one, they prioritize one a year. There may be a creative, if they have the space and the budget to work on two, those are two totally different teams working on two totally different things. But for the most part, they kind of just work on one thing a year. And that was on purpose. In other animation studios and stuff, an anime director or an animation director may have on multiple projects going on at once. But the idea with Studio Ghibli is if they put all their resources into one thing and focus on that one thing, they can get that project going and off the ground, because so much happens during a project. So many rewrites, so many false turns, so many ups and downs, so many things that you cannot account for when you are delivering or creating something. The creative process is one of spontaneity. So when you have all of your resources pointed at one thing and you take one step at a time, you can be available to it. And that's a huge concept that I wanted just everybody to know going into that. Please do read it, please. Oh my God, it's going to relieve so many pains. But I want to go a little bit further when it comes to publishing, because I was on a client call about this, and I thought it was worth sharing with other people, because it's worth talking about this as an industry. I want to say boutique publishers have a special place in my heart, because seeing the fall of publishing, traditional publishing, as it was over the past few years has been wild. I kind of, I saw it coming, as one does when they're on the ground floor and also in the back end. I worked in digital marketing and publishing and influencing, but I'm also a traditionally published author. So I worked at the front end as it is me working with the publisher. And then I've worked inside the building as an editor before. I've edited stuff. I was contracted to edit some things. And then I've worked with authors who sometimes contracted me to work with their things before they went. I touched their stuff before they turned their stuff into their publisher and stuff like that. So I've worked in many different places in publishing. So it was very easy for me to see the writing on the wall, because everyone's writing red rum everywhere on the wall. You go to ththese rooms and it's like, whoa, this is weird. It's looking a little uncomfortable in here. And as some of you may know, when you are a person who kind of a jack of all trades, so you kind of end up in a lot of different rooms, it's really difficult to explain to people what's going on in a different room and how that relates. The more information you have, the more scary you seem. Because people think what you do is witchcraft. They're like, how did she see this coming? And it's like, well, that's because I do a lot of cultural exchange between different rooms. So it's really easy for me to see things and see patterns. So yeah, I saw a lot of this happening and coming, but what I didn't know and what I couldn't account for was what would happen afterwards. The falling the falling action. We've got the rising action. Is it called the falling action? Anyways, the denouement, so to speak. Like what is the aftermath of everything? What comes out of the cloud, the dust storm, and that was the collapse of publishing. And a lot of boutique publishers are starting to come out, and I thought that was amazing. My eyes have been pulled. My attention has been pulled. I've gotten emails. Which, by the way, if you run a boutique publisher and you think I might be interested in your stuff, by all means, let me know what kind of arcs you've got going on. I'm always happy to look at that, and if I see that there's something relatable, I'll reach out to you and let you know, yeah, go ahead and send me that. But if not, it's because it's not relatable. And just keep going. But no, I'm so serious. I've had so many reach out, and I've got some book reviews that I'll probably be back on here with, because I'm excited to get into these things and to see this new wave of publishing. And so with that being said, if you are a publisher and you're in this, you probably are wondering, like, how can you survive? There's a lot of energy these days. There's a lot of uncertainty going around. And how do you ethically exchange with other people in a time where there's so much disparity, so much confusion, so much tension, and so much is coming out information-wise about how people were treated in work and this and that. So how do you work with people after people have been abused in work, after you may have been abused at work? How do you go about reframing and thinking how you work with others in a fair way? And so a theory that I kind of had going, and I mentioned this to a client, was this. I love this concept from Mixing Work with Pleasure. Work 1 year at a time, or one project at a time, but also consider, instead of trying to find in-house or people that you are always relying on, try to think of each and every single book that you produce and you come out with as its own quest and adventure. Okay, it needs its own editor team, and editors, you're probably thinking developmental and copy editing, right? You need at least two. The art team, you need design for the cover, the jacket, which is different than book design. Those are two different people, right? And then what other team is there? There's marketing, where you have public relations, so to other news and media outlets like journals and all of that kind of stuff. And then you've got to the readers, so the public marketing. Like those are two different roles and jobs. And social media also has a different, is a department within that has different roles and jobs. So like consider, maybe you can put public relations and social media into the same bucket, so to speak. But those, as a publisher, those are all different roles that you need to know a little bit of something about, right? So for me, let's just use me as an example. If I was running a micro or boutique publisher, or, with my client, when I say, I recommend that they become a not an expert. You don't need to be an expert, but you need to have a pretty well in-depth understanding of all of those different roles, what they do, how they function, and how to do a little bit of that yourself. So maybe the first book, if you're just starting out on this, or you want to think back to your first book where maybe your hand was in the pot an awful lot, right? And you had to learn about how all of each and every single one of these things goes. A lot of you start out self-publishing, and then you've grown into a bigger space. So as you give and you take your hand out of that hat and you go, you know what, I need a whole nother person to do this. I would suggest, or I'm just interested in the theory, if maybe some others do this as well and want to share, because I do feel like money and how money moves, it's been such a secretive thing lately, and a lot of people want more information on how to pay fairly, right? Like I have clients who are like, I want to do right by everybody. I don't even care about making money on my own. And I say this, figure out how much the book cost. Okay, that is, everyone who has a hand on that book or who has eyes on that book, they need compensation for that. And the compensation is a negotiation between you two. This person needs to negotiate based on what they want and also based on what you want. A lot of people try to avoid negotiation or think of it in terms of getting like, I'm getting, something pulled over on me, or, they come in at it a little, unsure of how to navigate it, because they don't want someone to feel like they're being taken advantage of. They also don't want to be taken advantage of. And the thing that I say is, just focus on the thing that needs to be done and what someone else is willing to do. So for some people, copy editing is a breeze, and that is not something that they need to be paid an arm and a leg for. And for some people, it is their bread and their butter, and they are extremely efficient at it, but perhaps it takes a big toll on them, and so it costs more for you to get it from them. Who's better at it? Well, that depends. It could be that the one that it takes a toll on them, and you're gonna have to pay more, is better for the project. Okay, or vice versa. Those are all things that you have to figure out in the moment. But I think it's important for everyone to know how much that book cost, including the cost of self-care of the project manager. If you're doing this, what do you need to be able to show up calmly and show up as your brand message, right? That means unperturbed by all sorts of emotions, being stressed out. Is this getting done? Is this getting done? That's stress. You can't show up as your brand every day when you sit down to do work when you're stressed. So what does it take for you to be in your creative space? What are you comfortable with? And then go from there. If you want to expand that, those are our goals, and that's how we grow, right? But you need to figure out how much the book cost, one, and that includes your self-care, as in you must pay your own salary, and the contracted work out for others. And then royalties are what it cost, recuperating that cost, and then out to the author. So that's my thoughts and ideas. I think that's in general. It's not in general how traditional publishing did it. I know, I know the figures. Wild. But that being said, it's really not that hard. I think that it feels difficult in a lot of different places and spaces when I've been in these conversations with clients. It feels difficult to figure out because there's been so much shadow of a doubt cast by the traditional publishing shadow. You know what I mean? Like, it's the traditional publishing would obscure itself consistently. Oh, it's so expensive. This is expensive. And then they, when you ask them, okay, where's the money going? They're confused. You'd be surprised they even know what money looks like half the time. I don't mean to bang and rag on them or anything like that. But because I know a lot of people worked there, especially a lot of people who are following my channel, worked in the industry. So you know what it's actually like, and you know that not everything was bad. There's a lot of creatives in publishing. So publishing was I will say this, publishing was one of the best run industries when it comes to project management, because there's so many creatives in the field. So if people who worked in publishing, you are primed to run. You're primed to run if you can just learn all the lessons from being in that world in corporate and stuff like that. So anyways, that's all I have to say. Please go read Mixing Work with Pleasure, My Life at Studio Ghibli by Toshiro Suzuki. Honestly, it'll change your life. It'll change your life. And that's it for now. Okay, bye. TJ Web, for now.